The moving truck pulled away just as the sun started setting behind the neat row of identical houses. Jessica stood in her new driveway, boxes stacked around her like a cardboard fortress, and wondered if she'd made the right decision. Her daughter Lily was already inside, probably claiming the bigger bedroom before Jessica could even suggest they flip a coin for it. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Jessica turned to see a woman in her 70s waving from the house next door. She had kind eyes and was holding what looked like a casserole dish wrapped in aluminum foil. "I'm Margaret," the woman said, walking over carefully. "Thought you might be too tired to cook tonight." "You're a lifesaver," Jessica said, accepting the still warm dish. "I'm Jessica, and that blur you might have seen running inside is my daughter Lily. She's 8 and has more energy than should be legally allowed." Margaret laughed. "I raised 3 boys. I know all about that energy." Her smile faded just a bit. "Listen, I don't want to dampen your first day, but I should probably mention that we have a pretty active HOA here. The president, Richard, he takes the rules very seriously." "Oh, that's fine," Jessica said. "I'm not really a rule breaker anyway. Just want a quiet place for Lily and me to start over." Margaret nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. "Just giving you a heads up, dear. Enjoy the casserole." Jessica didn't think much about the conversation as she and Lily unpacked that night. They were both exhausted, eating Margaret's chicken casserole straight from the dish while sitting on boxes in what would eventually be their living room. The divorce had been rough, and this little house in Meadowbrook was supposed to be their fresh start. Jessica worked from home doing graphic design, which meant she could be there when Lily got home from school. That was all that mattered. The first violation notice arrived 3 days later. Jessica found it tucked into her door, an official-looking letter on HOA letterhead. She read it twice, thinking it must be a joke. According to the notice, her welcome mat was in violation of community standards. Apparently, it was the wrong shade of brown and didn't match the approved color palette outlined in Section 4.7 of the HOA guidelines. "It's a doormat," Jessica said out loud to no one, but she didn't want trouble. So she drove to 3 different stores until she found one in the exact shade of tan listed in the guidelines, $45 for a doormat. She tried not to think about it. A week later, another notice appeared. This time it was about Lily's bicycle. The pink bike with streamers on the handles was visible from the street when parked in the driveway, which was apparently against the rules. Jessica moved it to the backyard, even though it meant Lily had to walk all the way around the house every time she wanted to ride it. "Mom, why can't I keep my bike where I can see it?" Lily asked one afternoon. "Just some neighborhood rules, sweetie. It's not a big deal." But it was becoming a big deal. Jessica started noticing a man walking past her house several times a day. He was in his 60s, tall and thin, always dressed like he was heading to a business meeting even though he was just walking around the neighborhood. He'd slow down as he passed her house, looking at her yard, her windows, her driveway, like he was searching for something out of place. One Saturday morning, she was planting flowers in her front yard when he stopped at the end of her driveway. "You must be the new resident," he said. It wasn't friendly. It was the tone someone uses when they're already annoyed with you. Jessica stood up, wiping dirt from her hands. "Hi, yes. I'm Jessica. Just moved in a few weeks ago. Richard Thornton. Joy, president." He didn't offer his hand. "I trust you've been receiving the notices about your violations." "I have, and I've fixed everything mentioned," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice pleasant. "The doormat, the bicycle. There's also the matter of your window treatments," Richard interrupted. "They need to be white or off-white when viewed from the street. Yours appear to be beige." Jessica felt something twist in her stomach. This wasn't about community standards. This was something else. They came with the house. "The previous owners are no longer my concern." "You are?" Richard pulled out a small notebook and made a mark in it. "You have 2 weeks to replace them. You'll find the acceptable brands listed on page 17 of the community guidelines." He walked away before Jessica could respond. That night, after Lily went to bed, Jessica sat at her kitchen table with the thick HOA guidebook open in front of her. Page after page of rules about grass height, mailbox styles, approved paint colors, acceptable holiday decorations. She felt like she'd moved into a museum, not a neighborhood. What Richard Thornton didn't know, what none of the neighbors knew, was that Jessica had spent 15 years of her life training in karate. She'd earned her 3rd-degree black belt by the time she was 30, competed in tournaments, taught classes. But when Lily was born, she'd made a choice. She put away the GI, stopped competing and focused on being a mom. It was a part of her life she rarely talked about anymore. It felt like something from a different person's life. As she closed the guidebook and turned off the kitchen light, Jessica reminded herself that she was here for a fresh start. She'd follow the rules, keep her head down, and give Lily the stable home she deserved. How hard could it be? She had no idea that in the weeks ahead, she'd find out exactly how hard Richard Thornton could make things. And he had no idea who he was dealing with. 2 months had passed since Jessica moved into Meadowbrook, and she'd received 11 violation notices. 11. She kept them in a folder on her kitchen counter, each one more ridiculous than the last. The latest one was sitting there now, mocking her while she made Lily's lunch for school. Apparently, her daughter's chalk drawings on their own driveway were considered temporary modifications to the property and needed to be removed within 24 hours. They were hopscotch squares, drawn with washable chalk, on their own driveway. Jessica had scrubbed them off the night before, watching the colors swirl down the driveway into the grass. Lily had cried, asking why she couldn't draw like the other kids. Jessica didn't have a good answer, because none of the other kids seemed to get violation notices for their chalk art. "Morning, sweetheart," Jessica said, trying to sound cheerful as Lily shuffled into the kitchen in her school uniform. "Is Mr. Richard going to yell at us again?" Lily asked quietly. Jessica's heart broke a little. Her 8-year-old shouldn't have to worry about things like this. "No, baby." And he didn't yell. He has a lot of rules he wants everyone to follow. "I don't like him," Lily said, and Jessica couldn't argue with that. After dropping Lily at school, Jessica came home to find another notice on her door. This time it was about her car. According to Richard's measurements, her vehicle was parked 3 inches over the property line into the common area. 3 inches. The fine was $75. Jessica grabbed her phone and took pictures of her car from every angle. It wasn't over any line. She was absolutely certain of it. This was harassment now, plain and simple. She walked next door to Margaret's house and knocked. The older woman answered quickly, almost like she'd been waiting. "Another notice?" Margaret asked, seeing Jessica's face. "He measured my car, said it's over the property line by 3 inches. Jessica showed her the notice. "Margaret, what's going on? Why is he doing this to me?" Margaret sighed and invited her in for coffee. Sitting at Margaret's kitchen table, Jessica learned the truth about Richard Thornton. "He's done this before," Margaret said quietly. "There was another single mother who lived in your house before you. Nice woman, had 2 little boys. Richard did the same thing to her. Violation after violation, fine after fine. She ended up selling the house just to get away from him." "But why?" Jessica asked. "What did I do to him?" "You exist," Margaret said simply. "Richard likes power. He likes control. And single mothers, people he thinks won't fight back, they're easy targets for him. The rest of us," she looked down at her coffee, "we're all too scared to stand up to him. He'll make your life miserable if you do." Jessica felt something cold settle in her chest. "So everyone just lets him do whatever he wants?" Margaret nodded, looking ashamed. "I'm sorry, dear. I know it's not right. But I'm 73 years old, living on a fixed income. I can't afford the fines if he comes after me." Jessica understood, but it didn't make her feel any better. She went home and paid the $75 fine online, watching her bank account dip lower. Between the doormat, the window treatments, and now this, she'd spent over $300 on Richard's made-up violations. The final straw came 3 weeks later, at the mandatory monthly HOA meeting. Jessica usually avoided these meetings, but this month she had to attend, because Richard was proposing a special assessment. Every homeowner would have to pay an extra $500 for community improvements. Jessica needed to vote against it. She couldn't afford another $500. The community center was packed with about 30 neighbors, all sitting in folding chairs facing a table where Richard sat with 2 other board members. Jessica slipped into a seat in the back, hoping to stay invisible. She should have known better. When the time came for discussion about the special assessment, Jessica raised her hand. "I'd like to understand exactly what improvements this money is for," she said politely. Richard's eyes locked onto her like a missile finding its target. "The board has already reviewed the proposals. We don't need to rehash every detail with residents who don't understand community management." "I understand money management just fine," Jessica said, keeping her voice steady. I'm asking what my $500 will pay for. New signage at the community entrance, Richard said impatiently. Now, if there are no other questions, the current signs look fine to me, another neighbor spoke up. A few others murmured agreement. Richard's face started turning red. Jessica could see the anger building in him, the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands gripped the table edge. Perhaps we could see quotes from contractors, Jessica suggested, just so we know the money is being spent responsibly. That did it. Richard stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He pointed at Jessica, his hand shaking. You've been nothing but a problem since you moved here. Constant violations, refusal to follow basic community standards, and now you're disrupting official meetings with your questions. Jessica stood up too, her heart pounding. I've fixed every violation you've sent me. I've paid every fine. I'm just asking a reasonable question about a large expense. You're an irresponsible parent and a community nuisance, Richard said, his voice getting louder. He started walking toward her through the rows of chairs. People like you don't belong in Meadowbrook. You can't afford to be here. You can't follow simple rules, and frankly, you're bringing down property values. He was standing right in front of her now, close enough that she could smell his cologne. His face was inches from hers, and he was jabbing his finger in her direction, trying to intimidate her into backing down. The entire room had gone silent. Everyone was watching. Jessica felt something familiar settle over her. Her breathing automatically regulated itself, deep and controlled. Her stance shifted subtly. Weight balanced, center of gravity lowered. 15 years of training doesn't just disappear because you stop practicing. Her body remembered things her mind had tried to forget, but she didn't move. She didn't need to. Not yet. I'll see you at the next meeting, Richard, she said quietly, her voice perfectly calm. She took Lily's hand and walked out of the community center, every eye in the room following them. Behind her, she heard Richard laugh. That's what I thought, he said to the room. Some people know when they're beaten. What Richard didn't know was that Jessica had never been beaten. Not in a tournament, not in a match, and certainly not by a bully with a clipboard. She just hadn't decided yet whether he was worth the effort. Jessica was working at her computer when the doorbell rang. She glanced at the clock. 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Lily wouldn't be home from school for another hour. Through the front window, she could see Richard standing on her porch. He wasn't alone. 2 other people stood behind him, a man and a woman she vaguely recognized from HOA meetings. They were board members. She opened the door but didn't step back to let them in. Can I help you? We're here to conduct an inspection, Richard said, holding up his clipboard like it was a badge. We received a complaint about violations in your backyard. A complaint from who? Jessica asked. That's confidential. Now if you'll step aside, we need access to your backyard. Jessica felt her jaw tighten. Do you have a warrant? Or at least a written notice that you were coming? The HOA bylaws give the board the right to inspect properties for violations, Richard said, his voice taking on that familiar condescending tone. It's in Section 12. Surely you've read the guidelines by now. Section 12 says you need to provide 24 hours written notice before any inspection. Jessica replied calmly. She'd read those guidelines cover to cover after the last meeting. You haven't provided that. Richard's face darkened. We don't have time for this. There's a violation that needs to be documented immediately. Then you can come back tomorrow with proper notice, Jessica said. That's when Richard made his mistake. He tried to push past her, actually putting his hand on her door and attempting to shoulder his way into her house. I said we're coming in. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Jessica's body moved on pure instinct, 15 years of training taking over before her mind even registered the threat. She sidestepped, her hand coming up to redirect Richard's momentum. In one smooth motion, she used his own forward movement against him, guiding him down and forward. Before he could even process what was happening, Richard found himself face down on her porch, his arm gently but firmly controlled in a basic joint lock. She wasn't hurting him. She was just stopping him, completely. The 2 board members stood frozen, their mouths hanging open. Mr. Thornton, Jessica said, her voice perfectly calm. The next time you try to enter my home without permission, I will call the police. Do you understand? She could feel him trying to struggle, but the lock was textbook perfect. Any movement he made would only cause himself discomfort. He stopped fighting. "And just so we're clear," Jessica continued, "I'm a third-degree black belt in karate. I earned it over 15 years of training. I don't talk about it because I left that part of my life behind when my daughter was born, but I will protect my home and my child. Are we clear?" "Let me go," Richard hissed, his cheek pressed against her welcome mat, the one he'd made her buy. Jessica released the lock and stepped back, giving him space to get up. Richard scrambled to his feet, his face bright red, a mixture of rage and humiliation. His carefully combed hair was messed up and there was dirt on his expensive shirt. You assaulted me," he sputtered, pointing at her with a shaking finger. "That's assault. You put your hands on me." "You tried to force your way into my home," Jessica said evenly. "That's called self-defense. And your friends here witnessed the whole thing." Richard turned to the two board members. "You saw that? She attacked me." The man shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, you did try to go into her house without permission. I was conducting official HOA business." "Without proper notice," the woman added quietly. "She's right about the 24-hour rule." Richard looked between them, betrayed. Fine, this isn't over. I'm calling the police. I'm filing assault charges. You're going to regret this." "You do what you need to do," Jessica said. "But right now you need to leave my property." Richard stormed off toward his car, the two board members following more slowly. Jessica could see them talking to each other in low voices, glancing back at her house. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart finally starting to race now that the adrenaline was catching up. Her hands were shaking slightly. She looked at them, surprised. In all her years of competing, she'd never used her training like that. Never on an actual person who meant actual harm. It had worked exactly like it was supposed to. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret next door. "Are you okay?" I saw Richard leave, looking upset. Jessica texted back, "Long story. I'm fine." Within an hour, she got a call from the local police department. Richard had indeed filed a complaint. An officer would be coming by to take her statement. Officer Chen arrived just as Jessica was picking up Lily from school. He was young, professional, and patient as Jessica explained what had happened. She showed him the HOA guidelines about the 24-hour notice. She explained Richard's pattern of harassment over the past months. "Do you have any evidence of the incident itself?" Officer Chen asked. Jessica shook her head. "Just the two witnesses who were with him." "Actually," came Margaret's voice from the front yard, "my doorbell camera caught the whole thing. I already downloaded the footage if you need it." Officer Chen reviewed the video on Margaret's phone, watching it twice. Jessica could see Richard trying to push into the house, could see her defensive movement, could see how quickly and controlled the whole thing was. "Ms. Harrison," the officer said, handing the phone back to Margaret, "this is clearly self-defense. Mr. Thornton attempted to force entry into your home without permission. You stopped him using minimal necessary force. He wasn't injured, and you released him immediately when he stopped advancing. So no charges?" Jessica asked. "Against you? No. If anything, Mr. Thornton should be grateful you showed restraint." Officer Chen closed his notebook. "Between you and me, this isn't the first complaint we've gotten about HOA issues in this neighborhood. You might want to consider filing a police report yourself about the harassment." After the officer left, Margaret came over with 2 cups of tea. They sat on Jessica's porch while Lily played in the backyard. "That was the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years of living here," Margaret said. "I just defended my home," Jessica said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Margaret said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I wouldn't have. None of your neighbors would have. That's why he keeps getting away with it." She paused. "But now everyone's going to know what happened." "The video is already being shared in the neighborhood group chat." Jessica felt a knot form in her stomach. "Is that good or bad?" Margaret smiled. "Honey, I think you're about to find out that you're not as alone as you thought." That night, Jessica's phone started buzzing with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Neighbors she'd never spoken to. They were reaching out one by one with the same message: they wanted to help. And they had stories about Richard that made Jessica's blood run cold. The video spread through Meadowbrook like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in the neighborhood had seen it. Jessica watched her phone light up with message after message from neighbors she'd only waved to in passing. But one message stood out. It was from Margaret. "Come over when you can. I have something to show you." Jessica found Margaret at her kitchen table, a large accordion folder spread out in front of her. The older woman looked tired but determined. "I've been keeping these for 2 years," Margaret said, patting the folder. "Every violation notice Richard has sent me. Every fine that didn't make sense. Every threatening letter." She pushed the folder toward Jessica. "And I'm not the only one." Jessica opened the folder. Inside were dozens of notices, some for violations so petty they seemed like jokes. A garden gnome that was 2 inches too tall. Christmas lights left up until December 26th. A trash can visible from the street for 15 minutes after pickup time. "Why didn't you say something?" Jessica asked. "Because I was scared," Margaret said simply. "Richard threatened to fine me $500 when I questioned one of his notices. I'm on a fixed income, Jessica. I can't afford to fight him." She paused. "But watching you stand up to him yesterday, seeing you protect yourself without backing down, you reminded me that being scared isn't the same as being powerless." Over the next 3 days, more neighbors came forward. They came to Jessica's house quietly, almost like they were afraid of being seen. Each one brought their own folder of violations, their own stories of harassment. There was Tom and Angela from 3 houses down. Richard had threatened to fine them $1,000 because their teenage son's basketball hoop was visible from the street. They'd taken it down, even though their son had saved for a year to buy it. There was Mr. Patel, who'd been forced to cut down a tree in his backyard because Richard claimed it was too tall, according to HOA rules. The tree had been planted by Mr. Patel's late wife. There was Jennifer, a single mother like Jessica, who'd lived in Meadowbrook for 5 years. She showed Jessica a spreadsheet she'd been keeping. Over those 5 years, she'd paid over $4,000 in fines for violations like parking in her own driveway overnight and having the wrong color garbage bags. "He goes after single mothers the most," Jennifer said quietly. "I think he assumes we won't fight back because we can't afford lawyers." Jessica spread all the documentation across her dining room table. It was overwhelming. 2 years of systematic harassment, not just of her, but of at least 15 families in the neighborhood. "We need to do something," Tom said. "The question is what?" Jessica had been thinking about this since the incident on her porch. "The HOA has bylaws, right? Rules about how the board operates?" Margaret nodded. "There's a whole section about removing board members. You need a petition signed by 30% of homeowners, then a special meeting, then a vote." "How many homes are in Meadowbrook?" Jessica asked. 68, Mr. Patel answered. Jessica did the math. "So we need 21 signatures to call for a recall election. Richard will make our lives hell if we try this and it doesn't work," Angela said nervously. "He's already making our lives hell," Jennifer pointed out. "At least this way we're fighting back." They spent the next week quietly going door to door. Jessica was surprised by how many people wanted to sign the petition. Turns out almost everyone in Meadowbrook had a story about Richard. Even the people who'd never gotten violation notices lived in constant fear that they might be next. By the end of the week, they had 32 signatures. More than enough. But Richard wasn't sitting idle. He sent out an email to the entire neighborhood claiming that Jessica had violently assaulted him and was now organizing a hostile takeover of the HOA. He attached a legal opinion from his personal attorney stating that the recall petition was invalid due to procedural irregularities. Jessica read the email twice, feeling her anger rise. But then she remembered something her karate instructor used to say. "Anger makes you sloppy. Stay calm, stay focused, and you'll see the opening." She forwarded the email to a lawyer friend from her old life before Lily was born. He called her back within an hour. "This is garbage," he said bluntly. "His attorney is trying to intimidate you. The petition is perfectly valid. In fact, given what you've shown me about the violation notices, Richard might be the one in legal trouble. He's been using his position for personal harassment, which violates his fiduciary duty to the HOA." Armed with this information, Jessica sent her own email to the neighborhood. She kept it simple and factual. She outlined the legal basis for the recall petition. She attached the lawyer's response, and she announced the date for the special meeting, 3 weeks away. Richard tried to block the meeting, claiming the community center was already booked. Margaret quietly mentioned that her son-in-law was on the city council and could check the reservation system. Turns out the center was completely available. Richard had been lying. As the meeting date approached, Jessica started getting anonymous notes in her mailbox. Some were supportive. Others were threatening. One said simply, "You'll regret this." She found Lily looking at one of the notes one afternoon. Her daughter's face was worried. "Mom, are we in trouble?" Lily asked. Jessica knelt down to her daughter's level. "No, baby, we're not in trouble. Sometimes when you stand up to people who are being mean, they try to scare you into stopping, but that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong." "But what if Mr. Richard wins?" Lily asked. "What if he makes us leave like he did to the other family?" Jessica pulled her daughter close. "Then we'll deal with that if it happens. But you know what I've learned? When you stand up for what's right, even if you're scared, other people start standing up too. And that's what's happening now. We're not alone anymore." The night before the meeting, Jessica couldn't sleep. She kept going over her presentation, checking the documents, making sure everything was in order. This wasn't like a karate tournament where she could rely on years of training and muscle memory. This was different, or was it? Her instructor's voice came back to her again. "Karate isn't just about fighting. It's about discipline, focus, and staying centered when everyone around you is losing control. Those skills work anywhere." At 2 a.m, Jessica got up and went through her old kata in the living room. The forms came back to her naturally, her body remembering the movements even after years away. With each motion, she felt herself growing calmer, more centered. She wasn't doing this because she wanted to fight. She was doing this because it was right. Because Lily was watching. Because all those neighbors who'd been too scared to speak up were finally finding their voices. Tomorrow, at the meeting, Richard would try to intimidate her. He'd use procedures and rules and his authority to make her back down. But Jessica had faced down opponents in tournaments who were bigger, stronger, and more experienced. She'd learned that real strength wasn't about physical power. It was about staying calm under pressure, seeing clearly when others couldn't, and never, ever giving up. Richard Thornton was about to learn that lesson the hard way. As the sun came up on the day of the meeting, Jessica made breakfast for Lily, helped her get ready for school, and went through her normal routine. She wasn't nervous anymore, she was ready. The community center was packed. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the back wall. Jessica had never seen this many neighbors in one place. She recognized faces she'd only seen in passing, people who'd lived in Meadowbrook for years, all here for the same reason. Richard sat at the head table with his 2 remaining board allies, looking calm and confident. He had his laptop open, his clipboard ready, and a thick binder of what Jessica assumed were parliamentary procedures. He thought he could control this meeting the same way he controlled everything else. Jessica arrived early with Margaret and Jennifer. They sat in the front row, the folders of evidence stacked neatly on the chair beside them. Lily was with a babysitter tonight. Jessica had wanted her daughter there to see this, but she also didn't want her scared if things got heated. Richard called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock, banging a gavel like he was a judge. "This special meeting has been called regarding a petition to remove the current board," he began, his voice formal and cold. "Before we proceed, I want to state for the record that this petition is based on personal grievances and false accusations. The current board has served this community with dedication and integrity." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jessica could feel the tension in the room. "However," Richard continued, "we will follow proper procedure. The petitioners have 15 minutes to present their case. Then the board will respond and we'll move to a vote." He looked directly at Jessica. "Ms. Harrison, you may begin." Jessica stood up, gathering her folders. Her hands were steady. She thought about all those tournaments, standing in front of judges, waiting for her turn to compete. This was just another kind of competition. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I'm going to keep this simple. Over the past 2 years, the current HOA board, under Richard's leadership, has systematically harassed residents through excessive and unjust violation notices." She opened the first folder and began laying out the evidence on a table in front of the room. Margaret Thompson received 17 violation notices in 2 years for things like a garden gnome being 2 inches too tall and Christmas lights still up on December 26th. She moved to the next folder. Tom and Angela Rodriguez were threatened with a $1,000 fine because their son's basketball hoop was visible from the street. The HOA guidelines have no rule about basketball hoops. One by one, Jessica presented case after case. The room grew quieter as she spoke. She showed the pattern of targeting single mothers and elderly residents. She displayed the excessive fines that had no basis in the actual HOA guidelines. She demonstrated how Richard had selectively enforced rules against people he didn't like, while ignoring the same violations in other homes. Richard tried to interrupt several times, but Jessica simply said, "I'm not finished," and kept going. She'd learned from watching him that control came from staying calm and following the rules. He'd used that against everyone else. Now it was working against him. When she got to her own case, she pulled out her violation notices. "I've received 14 violation notices in 3 months. I've paid over $600 in fines for things like a doormat being the wrong shade of brown and my car allegedly being 3 inches over a property line." "Those were legitimate violations," Richard said, standing up. "Then why don't other residents receive the same notices?" Jessica asked calmly. "Tom's car parks in the exact same position as mine. He's never gotten a violation. Margaret's doormat is actually darker than mine was. No violation. This isn't about community standards. This is about targeting specific people." She paused, looking around the room at her neighbors. "The worst part isn't the money or the stress. It's that Richard has created a community where people are afraid to plant flowers, afraid to let their kids play, afraid to park in their own driveways. That's not what a community should be." Jessica presented the legal opinion from her lawyer friend, explaining how Richard had violated his fiduciary duty to the HOA. She showed how the special assessment he'd tried to push through would have put thousands of dollars in expenses with no oversight or accountability. When her 15 minutes were up, she gathered her folders and sat down. The room was completely silent. Richard stood up, his face red. "This is exactly what I warned you about. Personal attacks disguised as concern for the community. Ms. Harrison has been a problem resident since day one, constantly questioning authority, refusing to follow simple rules." "What about my tree?" Mr. Patel called out from the middle of the room. "You made me cut down my wife's memorial tree. There was no rule about tree height." "What about my son's basketball hoop?" Tom added. More voices joined in. People who'd been silent for years were finally speaking up. Richard tried to use his gavel to restore order, but the voices kept coming. "Enough," Richard shouted. "This meeting is out of order. I'm calling a recess." "You can't call a recess during a recall vote," Margaret said firmly. "That's in Section 18 of the bylaws." "I checked." Richard looked at her, betrayed. Margaret had always been quiet, always paid her fines without complaint. Now she was citing rules at him. "Fine," Richard said. "Let's vote then. All in favor of removing the current board?" Hands went up across the room. Jessica counted quickly. It looked like almost everyone. All opposed? 3 hands. Richard and his 2 board allies. "The motion passes," Jessica said when Richard stayed silent. "According to the bylaws, we now need to elect an interim board to serve until the next scheduled election." "I nominate Margaret Thompson for president," Jennifer called out. "I second that," Mr. Patel added. Margaret looked shocked. "I don't know if I'm qualified." "You're more qualified than the person who was just removed," Tom said. And people laughed, the tension in the room finally breaking. Margaret was elected unanimously. 2 other reasonable neighbors were voted in as board members. Richard sat at his table staring at his laptop, refusing to look at anyone. As the meeting ended and people started filing out, several neighbors came up to Jessica to thank her. Some were crying. An older man shook her hand and said he'd been trying to sell his house just to escape Richard's harassment. Jessica felt Margaret's hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," the older woman said. "I couldn't have done this without you." "We did it together," Jessica said. "That's the point." Richard packed up his things in silence. As he walked toward the exit, he passed Jessica. For a moment, she thought he might say something, maybe even apologize, but he just looked at her with cold eyes and walked out. 3 months later, Meadowbrook was a different place. The new board had reviewed all the outstanding violations and canceled most of them, refunding hundreds of dollars in unjust fines. Lily's bike sat proudly in the driveway. Her chalk art decorated the pavement, and other kids had started drawing too. Jessica had started teaching a free self-defense class at the community center on Saturday mornings. It wasn't about fighting. It was about confidence, about knowing you could protect yourself, about standing firm when someone tried to push you around. Margaret attended every class along with Jennifer and a dozen other neighbors. One Saturday morning, As Jessica was demonstrating a basic defensive stance to a group of women and teenagers, Lily called out from where she was practicing with the younger kids, "Mom, why did you stop doing karate before?" Jessica thought about it. "I thought I had to choose between being strong and being a good mom. But I learned something important. Being strong, standing up for what's right, protecting people who can't protect themselves. That's exactly what good moms do. I just forgot for a while. And now you remember?" Lily asked. "Now I remember," Jessica said. Through the window, she could see the for sale sign in front of Richard's house. He was moving away, probably to another neighborhood where he could start over. Jessica felt a moment of something, not quite pity, but a recognition that holding onto power and control had made him miserable too. She turned back to her class, showing them how to stand balanced, centered, ready for whatever came next, because that was the real lesson she'd learned. Strength wasn't about being aggressive or dominating others. It was about knowing who you were, standing firm in that knowledge and helping others find their own strength. The neighborhood had been afraid for so long that they'd forgotten they had power. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up, and suddenly everyone remembers they don't have to live in fear. Jessica hadn't set out to be that person. She just wanted a safe place for her daughter to grow up. But in protecting that simple dream, she'd helped an entire community remember what they were capable of. And that, she thought as Lily demonstrated a perfect defensive stance to the younger kids, was worth every violation notice, every fine, and every moment of fear, because her daughter was watching. And Lily was learning that the strongest thing you can do is stand up for what's right, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared.